as I reflected on the ridiculous things that I've done and the amazing opportunities that I've had, and I will say that I felt very, very lucky a lot of times. But I would say that one thing that's been really consistent is that I've said yes to things even when I had no idea how it was going to work. I've always tried to make it a point. I don't just mean to say yes to opportunities for me. I mean, when somebody asks me, is there a way we can make this work? Um, I always try to find a way to make it work.
So, as you know, Unlocking Moves is my way to share stories of people who had key unlocking moments or pivotal moments, or things that really changed the trajectory of their career. And I tell guests that I want to hear stories, not just the glory stories. I want to hear the gory stories because the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. Well, speaking of stories, my guest today is Elijah May, and he has got a boatload of stories. You're going to be entertained. You're not going to want to miss today's episode of Unlocking Moves. But Elijah, before we get started, I like to hit my guests up with something off the wall, maybe an off the wall comment or question just to throw them off balance. You ready for this?
Absolutely.
All right. So you shared with me that you will talk about anything. You'll go on stage and you'll talk about even your most embarrassing moments. But you've also shared that there are certain stories that you don't like to share because they make you cry.
Oh, yeah.
So
True.
you probably know where I'm going with this. Tell me a story that
Oh
makes you
man.
cry.
Geez. Yeah, I'm a big softie for sure. So I mean, really anything. If I'm watching YouTube videos of dogs coming home, soldiers coming home from war or overseas and seeing their dogs or their kids, man, I'm a mess. Um, and I mean, it really is without exaggeration. Anything I talk about that to me is a beautiful human moment, just that really trips my trigger. I'm moved to tears not by sadness, but by things that I find sort of beautiful about the human condition. I've talked about this viral video called the WestJet Christmas Miracle,
I want to hear
and
about that one.
yeah, it's the only corporate video in history to have this raging viral success. There's been some others, but nothing at this level. And you know, as these people are going to get on the plane, they talk to Santa Claus, and then they think that that's it. You talk to Santa Claus, you get a gift card, and then you go about your day. And when they get to their destination, everything they told Santa Claus they wanted comes down the conveyor belt. And the reactions of the people there in Calgary where they landed were overwhelming to everybody. So you got, the people who made the video are crying. You got people behind the scenes crying. You got the staff who work for the airlines crying. You got all the guests crying. And every time I show this video, and I've showed it to countless classes and entrepreneur groups, I have to leave the room. And I always make some excuse like I'm going to go get some water. I just did it at UT last semester. And I hit play and then I just kind of make an excuse to make my way out of the room because otherwise I'll be up there uh, crying when the lights come back on. It's I probably watched it 200-300 times at this point. It gets me every time.
I love it. So let me see if I understand this correctly. WestJet was doing a promotion or this video. They take random customers who are getting on a flight.
Hmm.
Before they get on the flight, they have them talk to Santa Claus, tell them what they want. They land. In this case, happens to be Calgary. They get off the plane. The things that they said they want are coming down the conveyor belt. Tell me about some of the interesting wishes or some of the main ones that make you cry. I want to see you cry today, Elijah.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little prepared for this question. Okay, so there were the obvious ones, like, there's somebody who asked for a big screen TV, and they're just overwhelmed because first of all, just the logistics of WestJet going to Best Buy and packaging this thing and putting it in the oversized place where your luggage goes where it won't fit on the conveyor belt. It's a great reveal and a great production, and they're completely overwhelmed. But there's also two things that were one of which is become like a theme at WestJet because I've met the creative director. I talked to the guy who played Santa Claus who works at WestJet whose idea it was. These guys have become friends of mine. I'm looking to bring them here for South by Southwest with any luck. And they said the guy who got socks and underwear uh, is standing there crying, and they actually call him to this day Mr. Socks and Underwear. This is like in 2013. And Mike Mills, who was the creative director, said that was something he's sitting there behind the camera trying to understand. He thought this guy was going to be really upset. He was actually prepared for this guy being like screaming at people, this is bullshit. They got a big screen TV and I got socks and underwear, thinking he was going to be mad. And the guy was overwhelmed with emotion. Mike said it forced him to do some serious introspection. They've got to know the guy now. And the conclusion that they came to for why this was so moving to so many people was that it wasn't what they got. It was just that somebody actually listened. Like that's so unusual in our lives and in our society. And certainly when you're talking about doing business with a company, somebody actually listened. Somebody listened to something as seemingly unimportant as, man, I could use some socks and underwear. And they went and got some. And but the one that I don't think that I can tell without choking up a little bit here is there was a family that was I can't do it. They were forced to move right before Christmas, and it was a really, really tough time for the family. And it was just they were just a family dealing with normal family things. You can imagine, you and I both have kids. Imagine, having 6 and 9-year olds and moving to a new place right before Christmas, and it's funny because they didn't actually, I don't know if they missed it or if they just didn't say it, but they didn't actually tell Santa what they wanted. But as they were leaving, the one thing that accidentally got left behind, which was real important to the mom, was their camera, because they wanted to at least, document this experience, right? So they left behind their camera and it was lost forever. And someone at WestJet had just bought a few extra things just in case. And just call it what you want, coincidence, grace of God, whatever, someone had just grabbed a camera and wrapped it up and given it to that family. So when the mom opens the package, you can just see she's just like, the hundreds of millions of people who watch this video will never know why that mom had that reaction, but I got to hear it because I became friends with the team who produced the whole thing, and it was just like that was just lightning in a bottle. It was an incredible experience.
I love it, man. Thank you. Hey, thanks for playing along, Elijah. I know obviously I see how it impacts you.
I think you're gonna get me, man.
I got the feels to telling that story, and what a great story. And I see very few Hallmark commercials where I don't bust out myself. So just so you know, as you guys can tell, my guest today is Elijah May, and I got to tell you, the Dos Equis man has got nothing on Elijah. He grew up in rural North Carolina, a black boy in a predominantly white area. He spent a couple years homeless in high school. He went to the University of Southern California to major in engineering. He's got a whole story about that we're going to dive into. Then he got interested in human behavior, so he got into psychology. For some reason, he then determined that he wanted to get into the theater, so he connected with some folks in Hollywood. Then he got asked to get into PR because he broke up a fight on a movie set. And that's just the backstory. That's just his college experience. Today, Elijah is doing things like the Experience Firm, Team CMO, and Funded House. We're going to have a great story today. Elijah, thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, except for the fact that I didn't think to bring a hanky. So,
well, you got a sleeve. That's what most dudes usually use. So there you go. Hey, Elijah, usually I dive into the backstory a bit and talk about unlocking moves, and I've got a whole script on how I generally play this. I want to dive into what I just talked about. You got like 5 things that would make a sitcom or a movie just by itself. So can you share with us a little bit of the things that jump out at you? And I want to talk to just get our listeners a little understanding of who you are as a human being.
Yeah. It sounds a bit ridiculous when you list it all out like that. If it's not obvious, it's just been kind of a series of dumb luck. I did move out in high school. I've told my story to a lot of people. I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and without fail, people who are either foster kids or military brats come up and they assume I was one or the other, because I moved, by the time I was 18, I'd moved 18 times. And at 16, I was had a single mom, and it was a difficult life, and I was tired of moving. And she's like, we're gonna move again. And I just said, I'm not. I'm just I'm just not. And so I just ended up staying with anybody who would let me. So for the last couple of years there, before I went to college, I just lived on random people's couches. And my first really, stroke of luck there was that we found out that the people who are gone all the time were the people who are the wealthiest. So you got doctors and lawyers who are traveling who would love to have somebody house it. And so my best friend and I, that's what we did. We went from him living in a trailer and me living in a cabin in the woods to house sitting for doctors and lawyers. And they're leaving their sports cars, and they're like, don't take the Porsche, but you can take the souped up Ford Taurus SHO. I'll never forget that car. And the fridge is stocked, the pool's warm. They're leaving us a pile of cash, and to us, we had already made it at that point. But then, I got
Hey,
into
hold on. I got to pause
Yeah.
you right there for a second. So you're living in a cabin in the woods, your friend's in a trailer, and somehow you find yourself house sitting for very wealthy people, not only getting access to their food in their fridge and their car, you're getting paid for it.
We couldn't believe it. They'd be like, keys are here if you need anything. They did, please don't take like, the idea of $100,000 sports car was just like beyond our comprehension, but it was right there. And they had satellite dishes and pools, and they would leave us all the food, and they would leave us a pile of cash. And so we thought, well, that's great. We get paid up front. And then when they would get back, then they would be like, oh, here's your payment. We were just like, you got to be kidding. And I'm not gonna lie, that was a pretty great time. And then I went to USC and just kind of, as you pointed out, started in engineering and just continued to kind of fumble around in the dark, take classes that I thought were interesting.
Wait. I got to interrupt you because I know a little
Yes.
bit more of the story. Get on a flight to go to Southern California, to go to LA, to go to USC. Tell me what happened when you landed.
Yeah, so I took every single thing I owned. It all fit in one suitcase that I inherited from my grandfather, and I had $50 in cash. And I got off the airplane, and I went to baggage claim, and I got my one suitcase, and I saw somebody wearing a USC shirt, and I said, "Hey, do you know how to get to USC from here?" I'm from a tiny little town in the woods where things are all, you know, pretty close. I mean, you might have to, drive a short ways, but there's not that many things to do, right? I'd never really been in a big city, and certainly not by myself. Um, and he's like, "I don't understand." He's like, "What's your plan?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, what are you doing? Like, how are you supposed to get to USC?" I'm like, "I'm not supposed to get there other in any particular way." I'm like, "Can I take a cab?" And he finally this guy, his name was Dan Perez de la Garza, and he just said, just get in the van, man. Just He couldn't wrap his head around the idea that somebody who'd gotten into college just got on a plane and flew to LA and had zero plan beyond that. To say that USC wasn't expecting me is an understatement. I got an acceptance letter. I hadn't replied to the acceptance letter. I certainly hadn't taken a campus tour. I hadn't signed up for any classes. I didn't have anywhere I was supposed to live. And so Dan spent the rest of his day helping me figure out my life at USC. And without Dan, I have no idea what would have happened. But by the end of the day, I had a place to live. I had food to eat. He invited me to come to a barbecue at his fraternity, and I met a friend there who was the best man at my wedding.
That's awesome. So I want to highlight a couple of things because one of the things that I've heard in my interactions with you, most people talk about you got to have a plan. I want a 5-year plan, and you got to track towards a plan. And what I love about you, and honestly, what I love about me is plans are bullshit. Like I kind of shifted in the wind a little bit like you. So with the theme you're going to hear as you hear Elijah is there is no plan, but it's led to a beautiful experience. The other thing I want to highlight is people like Dan Perez de la Garza, angels in your life who have been there for you when you needed the most. Because Dan could have just walked away like most other people, especially a college kid, and not helped you or said, "Hey, grow up or go back home," or whatever they might have said. He helped you all day and helped you, sounds like much further than that. And you said he was in your wedding?
No, so he was in a fraternity, and he said, "Listen, he knew I didn't have anything. He said, we got a barbecue later, and we have free food, which is all you had to say, right? I said, okay. Well, I showed up, and then met a friend there at the barbecue, and that guy, Dave Holmes, was in my wedding. He was my best man. I was his best man. We've been friends since first day of freshman year of college.
I love it. Love it. Okay. So you're majoring in engineering, but you're not an engineer. So tell me what the hell happened.
Yeah, well, I found out a couple things real quickly. One, engineering classes require a lot of very expensive books, and I didn't have any money for that. And the other thing is they require many, many hours of homework. I didn't have the patience for that. So I didn't have really the money or the patience to be an engineer, as it turned out. And so I just quite literally started taking classes in anything that was interesting to me. I took communications, psychology, theater, film, philosophy was one of my favorites. But of all things, it was a class I took in life saving that was the one that completely and totally changed my life.
What? Okay. You got to explain that one.
Yeah, well, so I wasn't a particularly good swimmer, and I grew up in the mountains. And so if you live in the mountains, there's a lot of lakes and streams, and so we all learn how to dog paddle. We all learn how to not drown, right? But this whole idea of like getting in a pool and swimming competitively was completely and totally foreign to me. But I'm walking through campus and I see this pool, and this pool was built for the 1984 Olympics. If you probably saw Greg Louganis hit his head on the platform as he was diving into this pool, I mean, it is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. It is 12 feet deep at the shallowest point, and 18 feet deep at the deepest point. And I'm looking at lifeguards who are sitting out there in the sun just watching people swim, and I thought, man, what a great job. And I wonder how hard it is to become a lifeguard. So I went and looked up the classes, and they had a class on life saving. And there was swimming one, swimming two, swimming three, and then there was basically competitive swimming, and then there was lifeguarding. But whoever had put these classes in the syllabus had neglected to list one, two, three, or four as prerequisites. So there was nothing stopping me from signing up to be a lifeguard or to take a class to be a lifeguard. And I did. And on day one, the professor said, he pulled me aside. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're messing with me, right?" I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "You don't know. It's not that you don't know butterfly or breaststroke, which you don't. It's that you don't even know freestyle swimming. Like, you don't even know how to swim from one end of the pool to the other. Like, everybody else is a swimmer, and you're just over here doing this." He's like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Are you messing with me?" I said, "Well, I swear I'm not." And he didn't know what to do with me, so he just spent all this extra time teaching me the basic strokes. And to say that I passed that, I'm not even sure that I passed, to be honest with you. He passed to me by the narrowest of margins. And his name was Arvin Varma. He was also at my wedding. Um, and I asked Arvin, I said, "Hey, would you recommend me for a job as a lifeguard on campus?" And he said, "No, absolutely not. I can't do that. But I'll tell you the guy who's in charge, and you can go talk to him on your own." And somehow I convinced that guy to give me a job.
As a lifeguard or as a
Lifeguard. Yeah.
so so here you are dog paddling across the pool. Presumably you could save someone's life if you could get them to the side of the pool.
Yeah. 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 I actually, so the irony is, it's too long of a story to tell, but they let me work at the pool because it's an Olympic pool. You're not allowed in the pool unless you know how to swim. So lifeguards don't have any actual responsibility. Like, if you ever seen the Olympics, there are lifeguards there, I guess, in case somebody hits their head and falls in the pool. And so it's kind of like that. Like, I'm just a hall monitor, right? I just sit in the chair and like get a tan, and then like, at some point go sit inside. And but the U.S. Olympic swimming coach at the time was our swim coach at USC. And so between shifts, we would swim. I figured I should get better at swimming if I was going to be a lifeguard. And so I had the head coach of the U.S. Olympic team asking me what the hell I was doing and coaching me. And so I got to be a pretty decent swimmer. It's hard not to in that environment.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay. So now you're majoring in lifeguarding?
I was majoring in I wasn't majoring in anything. I was taking random classes. I finally had an advisor pull me aside and say, "What are you doing?" And as per usual, I said, "I have no idea what I'm doing." And he said, "Well, let's see if all this adds up to something." And so communications philosophy, theater, psychology, film, we said, well, it's all sort of human behavior seems to be like maybe the undercurrent here. So we came up with a custom degree in human behavior, which was a thing you could do. You're supposed to be a good student to come up with a custom degree, but you could also apparently just be a student who they were trying to get rid of. So, um, yeah. So I switched to human behavior, and then all of a sudden, USC offered me a full-time job.
All right. So a full-time job doing what?
So that's when I got hired in the PR department to work with the film studios.
Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Okay. So
Wow.
you're working for USC just as a student, right? So,
Yeah, so I'm a lifeguard for the university, and what happened is I was working on a couple of film productions. So what happened is every time a film production came along, every lifeguard wanted to go work on that film production because we got paid 12.50 an hour. To us at the time was like a crazy amount of money. You got paid 12.50 an hour, and you got basically all the food you can eat. There's no responsibilities. They bring rescue divers and everybody else. So we're working on like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer and or a Snapple commercial or what have you. And I ended up being the lifeguard that got assigned to all those commercials. And it was on one of those commercials where I ended up breaking up a fight between the diving coach, also our Olympic diving coach, and one of the directors of the commercials.
all right. So you are, by the way, I got to, as a PSA for everyone, if you are lazy and don't know what you're actually not lazy, you were never lazy, but if you don't know what you're going to do, go to USC and somehow you'll be on all the movie sets and you'll be a lifeguard. So follow the Elijah May playbook. Okay. So now you're there and I got to, you talk about a fight between the diving coach and the production, who is it? The movie guy?
Yeah, so you got this guy, and here's the thing, I don't remember the director's name. I just remember something that blew my mind. He was the highest paid commercial director in the world at the time. He's working on a Snapple commercial. And the idea is that they have somebody diving off the high dive and they do a bunch of flips and twists and then they dive into a Snapple bottle, right? And you can probably find it on YouTube. And I remember them saying that this director was getting paid $100,000 a day. And I just couldn't understand. I'm like, that was so beyond my comprehension, right? Because in my mind, I remember thinking $100,000 car is the most you could ever aspire to. And so now you get the idea that somebody actually gets paid $100,000 a day to make a commercial. And so what happened is on that particular day, they showed up early, which happens with film productions all the time. Something gets scrapped or something goes faster than it's expected. And so they move on to the next location and they might they might up to 4 locations in a given day. So they come to USC earlier than expected on a Saturday morning. So on this particular day, you got the diving team is running a little bit behind schedule. So the idea is the diving team comes in, practices in the morning, and then when they're done, the commercial team comes in and they use the pool. And there's just, whenever you're filming a commercial, there's just a ton of logistics in terms of who's got to be where, when. And so getting one group out of a location so you can get another group into the location is where you generally run into the most conflict. And so in this case, we've got a coach, like I said, this is the pool built for the 1984 Olympics. And this is the U.S. Olympic diving coach, right? Like Jeff Schaefer, and he's in his world. This is his pool. Like this is very much his pool, right? And what happens is that when he gets there, he's not worried about running behind because it's just whatever. It's his pool. He can be there whenever he wants. When he gets there on that day. Now I'm just a lifeguard on the set, so I'm not the person who coordinated telling people, "Hey, there's this giant thing going on. If you show up late today, we're going to have a problem." And so the commercial shows up early and starts setting up because no one's there to tell them not to. And then Jeff shows up and he's like, what the hell are you doing? Get out of my pool. And they're like, well, we paid all this money, to film here. And he's like, I don't care about that. That has nothing to do with me. This is my pool. Get out. And so then you got the director being like, I'm really important and you're ruining my commercial. And Jeff's like, you're important. I'm the Olympic diving coach. Go fuck yourself, right? So all of a sudden you got these two guys who are, they're just jawing at each other. And I grew up on a farm. And one thing that I know well is, we had a lot of horses. And I've seen 2 stallions who are acting like they want to fight, but they don't, right? Like, they don't want to fight, but no one can back down because otherwise, you'll be permanently embarrassed in front of your proverbial mares. So I just literally stepped in between them and said, hey, Jeff, let me just talk to this guy. I don't. And they both wanted someone to step in between them, and so they were both very agreeable. I said, Jeff, if you could just let me talk to him for a minute, and he's like, yeah, you talk to him. And then I said the same thing to the other guy. I'm like, just let me talk to him for a minute. He's like, yeah, you talk to him. And so, and I told both the guys the same thing. I'm like, how these sports people are, and they're like, yeah, they're the worst. You're like, how these Hollywood people are, yeah, they're the worst. I hope Jeff never sees this. I yeah, I broke it up, and I didn't really think much of it. Everybody kind of went about their business. The film crew agreed. They didn't have to be in the pool right then. They had plenty of setting up to do. So they got, got all their ducks in a row. And Jeff's like, we can just do the pool part and then we'll go do, stretching and all that stuff after. And so everybody's fine. And unbeknownst to me, because this is a contract, that's worth quite a lot of money, somebody who's called, the general counsel of the university, threatening to sue. And so the woman who runs this department, unbeknownst to me, has been called at home and is racing to USC. She lives about an hour away. And when she gets to USC, like, okay, like expecting things to be entirely on fire, because you can imagine this is before cell phones, right? Driving an hour like into like God knows what. And everybody's just fine. And she goes, what's going on? And they're like, oh, Elijah took care of it. And she's like, who's Elijah?
Who's Elijah?
And I'm just sitting in the lifeguard office. I'm like, hey, what's going on? And so unbeknownst to me, I've just said unbeknownst like 10 times in a row. She, I guess, had reached out to my boss and said, if he ever quits, I would like to hire him. But I didn't find that out till I think almost 2 years later.
If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by Hire Better, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere. Oh, that's awesome. I want to dive into your new stuff, but I know there's one more story that I want to pull out of you, and that's related to something similar. You mentioned that back in those days, I forget the year, but there was a presidential debate that was threatening to come on campus at USC. And somehow you got your paws in the middle of that.
Yeah, that was fun. Okay, so that was actually, so she hired me in 1998. So I went to school in 94 to 98. I mean, as soon as I was done with school, I'm looking for a job waiting tables because what am I going to do with my life? Then I get called to this woman's office who, I vaguely recognized, and she said, what are you doing? And she hired me. She hired me to be the liaison between, the university and the studios. And man, what a great gig, And so one of the strangest things that happened was that in about 2002, we were working on a TV show called 24 with Kiefer Sutherland on Fox. And they said, we want to host a presidential debate, but we'd like to set it at an actual university. Could we actually have it be set at USC in the show? And so we had decided that if it didn't reflect poorly on the university, you could use the brand. And then like 2 days later, CNN calls and says, hey, listen, we're looking for a place to host the Democratic primary debates between Edwards and Carey and Kucinich and Sharpton. And I'm like, well, that's really funny because the show 24 wants to host a presidential debate in our main auditorium. And they went, oh my God. They said, if the show 24 is doing it, then we have to do it there. And then I told the people at 24, I'm like, you're not going to believe this, but CNN wants to host an actual presidential debate at USC. And the show 24 said, well, if CNN's doing it, then we have to do it there. And so in the space of 2 weeks, I ended up hosting the actual U.S. Democratic primary debates between Edwards and Carey and Kucinich and Sharpton. And then the show 24. And the show 24, it caused so much confusion because the TV show, has all of these extra bells and whistles for TV that you don't have even when you have the Secret Service assigned to a project. So at some point, the Secret Service gets assigned to Edwards and Carey, and they show up on campus, looking to know everything. And they said, who knows everything? And they got pointed to me. So on one show, I was my car was actually in the TV show, and then I got asked to call the news because the news knew there was going to be a presidential debate at USC, but they didn't know. They didn't have the exact dates right. So they thought that the TV show was the real thing. So they sent the news choppers out. So now on one hand, I'm literally on speed dial with the Secret Service. And on the other hand, I'm being told to call the news and make the choppers go away. And it was just like, it was the craziest probably month of my life.
That's awesome.
And I'm not going to lie, a little bit of a power trip.
That's awesome. Well, I love the backstory. Thanks so much for sharing, man. I love it. So I think it's time at some point to get into what you're doing today. There's probably a transition that makes sense. Ultimately, I want to dive into an unlucky move that really changed your trajectory, but it sounds like you've had several already. So where do you want to go?
Kurt, I'm a big fan of the show. And so I've thought a lot about this, like what are the unlucky moves in my life? And I'm tempted to say that the unlocking moves in my life were all kind of dumb luck, which is not, very good for an audience who's like listening to the show, trying to figure out like what should I do. That's not particularly helpful. So as I reflected on the ridiculous things that I've done and the amazing opportunities that I've had, and I will say that I felt very, very lucky a lot of times. But I would say that one thing that's been really consistent is that I've said yes to things even when I had no idea how it was going to work. And, I will say that that lifeguarding job that I got that I had no business getting, the reason that I got it was because all the other lifeguards were, I swear this is true, working on a TV show that day. And they didn't have anybody who wanted to watch the pool. And in that one day that I had to be a lifeguard because nobody else wanted to do it, I spent the entire day cleaning. I scrubbed the deck. I dug out muck. I moved everything that needed to be moved. Like I had exactly one day. And by the time that day was over, he actually literally let somebody else go and kept me. And so, I am actually, I would say, quite lazy in a lot of ways, right? So I find it very hard to sit down and read. I find it extremely like working on accounting spreadsheets, contracts, this stuff makes me want to punch myself in the head. Um, and I've never been afraid of like physical hard work because I literally, I grew up on a farm. So, um, I've always been willing to just jump in and take my lumps, sometimes literally, and that served me probably better than any other single thing in my life.
So I'm going to parrot back what I think I just heard from you as far as your unlocking move. Number one was say yes to things that other people might say no to, Elijah. That's your superpower, is being open to the possibilities. The other thing is hard work, busting your ass and taking that extra step to make it work for you. There are so many people, and that's one of the points of the show. So many people who have an opportunity to say yes or have an opportunity to uh, seize the moment and they don't. If I could just one day get an opportunity at Hollywood, you made it happen because you were willing to say yes and work hard.
Yeah, one of the things that I get teased about to this day, and I actually spoke at an event called Fuck Up Nights and talked about it, was that J.J. Abrams asked me if I wanted to be on the pilot of Alias on the TV show, and I turned him down because I'd read the script and I thought it was terrible. And but the reason that that came along was because the first AD on that show and I had worked together on a couple different shows. And he had come along and said, "Hey, he's like, I'm training for a triathlon. I get very, very short breaks. Is there any way you could help me?" Man, he's like, "I would just love to be able to swim, when everyone else is going to lunch. Is there any way we could make that happen?" And, I'm like, "Yeah, man, I have the keys to everything." And that was not technically allowed. You're not supposed to let anybody in the pool, certainly not without a lifeguard. I'm like, this guy's training for triathlon. I made him promise me he wasn't going to drown. He's like, "I swim in the ocean." I said, "I think you'll be fine." And so I had done that just because somebody asked me. And so I've always tried to make it a point. I don't just mean say yes to opportunities for me. I mean, when somebody asks me, "Is there a way we can make this work?" Um, I always try to find a way to make it work, right? I just cannot stand the people who are like, the computer won't let me, or I'm not supposed to, or whatever. And I get that some people are rule followers, but I just can't stomach it. So, um, I actually take great pride in helping people do things that they're not supposed to do, right? Um, and so that is the entire world of entrepreneurship. But I was already sort of living my life that way long before I got introduced to the word entrepreneurship.
Well, I'm pretty sure that what you just said is going to inspire others to say yes and find a way to make it happen.
Yeah. In so many cases, I did something for somebody without realizing who that person was or caring, and it turned out that that person was kind of a big deal.
Well, the beauty in the way the world works is the number of people who lined up to say yes to you and help you along the way. Now you're simply turning around and extending a hand to others, and that leads to positive outcomes. I love it. Love it.
Yeah. Like I said, it feels like luck, but if I think hard about it, I would say that maybe there was a little bit of hard work in there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny, a number of people who have a quote 20-year overnight success story. There's a lot of work that goes into that success story. So let's talk about what you're doing today, Elijah. There's three things in your header. One is the experience firm, one is funded house, and the other is team CMO. Talk to me about any or all of them.
Okay. So left USC in 2006. I said I had the second best job at USC behind Pete Carroll. And we both left about the same time. Came here to Austin and worked on a show called Friday Night Lights, which most people remember. Show wrapped up, and I realized that there was nothing else going on in Austin for me to do. I had no relevant skills whatsoever. And so I kind of stumbled into a marketing and PR job. And there was another case of like crazy dumb luck there, but I got offered this job running PR marketing for a startup, with a real robust budget. So that was a lot of opportunity to learn. And I became a PR and marketing guy again just by being in the right place at the right time, and got really, really obsessed with what it is about marketing that works and what it is about marketing that doesn't work. Because, when I'm spending $60,000 a month and we're not getting good results and we're doing everything that everyone's telling us we're supposed to do, I'm like, there's got to be a reason, right? So I've always been really, really curious. And so I started digging into that reason. And I found out something that everybody already knows, and I mean everybody. Everybody will tell you that word of mouth is the most effective form of marketing, right? It's where most people get their business. It's where most people get their jobs. It's where most people meet their spouses, right? It is the thing that shapes all of our lives. Even in a social media age, it comes down to the people that we know and trust, right? And so the things that I'm doing today may seem awfully unrelated to a lot of folks. So I'm running an organization called Funded House where we match, companies with the right investors. I'm running an organization called a Team CMO. We produce the CMO show where we bring CMOs in and we sit them down and we talk about what they're doing and why it works. And then, we've got the experience firm and we design these experiences to help companies connect with their customers. And I wouldn't advise anybody to organize their life the way that I've organized my life, for sure. It's a lot, and it's confusing even to my closest friends and family, but it's all to me really the same thing, which just fundamentally, like, who are the people that need to connect and how are we going to connect them? Right. So every company in the world is trying to figure out how to connect with their customers, whether the customers that they don't have yet or the ones that they do have. How do you deepen those relationships? Chief marketing officers have got to figure out where they're going to spend their dollars to go and get more business, right? If they can't do that and if they can't do it quickly, they're going to get fired. And organizations are trying to find out which CMO is the CMO who knows how to solve the particular problem that they're trying to solve. And then, Funded House is, as I said, there are so many brilliant ideas out there. Kurt, you're an investor. There's so many great ideas out there, and you've got people who really want to. They have the courage to invest in companies, but they don't get a lot of good data on which companies have a reasonable chance at success. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot, and I think that we underestimate how much of an investment, even in the stock market, is just straight up gambling. And so what we're trying to do is to go in and just do a deep dive and de-risk the experience on both sides of the equation.
So you're bringing funders and founders together, but you're vetting the founders before they get to the funders. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So I started with the experience firm, and after designing, experiences for, big global brands like, T-Mobile, Beats by Dre, Alienware, Best Buy, Google, I realized that the rules are the same across the board, right? And if you can just kind of dig in and say, what is the problem? Why is it a problem? And then what do reasonable solutions look like? You start to get a really reliable kind of template. And in the meantime, I was volunteering for South by Southwest. I was blogging about the pitch competition, just meeting tons and tons of startups, and realizing that the startups who came in and talked about very specific things won these competitions over and over and over and over again. And I got, I dare say, obsessed with models. Like, if you have really good ways of organizing information, everything else gets almost unbelievably easier. It's probably it feels like a cheat code. There's a book out there called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's an interesting book because the audiobook is done like a podcast. It's an interview between two guys. But fundamentally, that idea that like 10X in your company is actually easier than, like, riding a bicycle is easier than running faster. The question is, what's the bicycle, right? So instead of, like, if you just want to figure out how to run faster, if you just you like the discipline of it, and like you're take great pride in the effort, that's fine. But from an entrepreneurial standpoint, that's not a very good strategy. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, let's go get a bike, or better yet, a car, because your ability to go much, much, much faster depends on the tools at your disposal and the people around you. Um, and the more that I've dug into why things work and how things work, the easier it's gotten to build systems that solve problems.
Interesting. I've heard about that book from a couple of other folks here recently. 10x is easier than 2x.
Yeah.
I like it. I'm gonna go check that out. And I love what you're doing with the Experience Firm and Funded House. We're going to see you at South by Southwest again this year. Always a great time. Dude, I could riff with you for hours. I love the stories, and I'm going to get some more stories when we have a beverage at South by Southwest. But let me ask you, I consider myself the listener's advocate. And if I've got Elijah May here one-on-one with an opportunity to ask him any question in the world, what would I ask him? And this is the one I've got to ask, man. What the hell do you say no to?
Man, that is the most important question, isn't it? Right? What's on your stop doing list is more important than what's on your to-do list. Okay, so at this point, I say no to things that I don't care about. And what I mean is I don't really care if anybody buys more stuff, right? I just don't, right? So I'm interested in helping companies grow that have a meaningful impact on the world, right? Like, I got 2 teenagers. I'm about to turn them loose in the world. If our son ever moves out, he's going to have to get a job somewhere. And I'd like him to be able to go to work for a company that doesn't view him as being entirely disposable. Our daughter's one of those kids who's probably going to go start her own company or, run a research lab somewhere. But I think that we need to be more deliberate about the kinds of companies that we're helping to grow on the investment side, on the consulting side. And, I'm not mad at anybody who goes out there and just focuses on making as much money as they can. I don't think it's really a recipe for happiness. I've met a lot of really, really wealthy people, including, some Hollywood celebrities who were just miserable. And I think that for myself and for the years I've got left, I'm really focused on what does it look like to build an extraordinary company that makes decisions other companies won't make.
Let's go. That lands with me, brother. I like it.
Thank you.
So one more question that I just thought of, and that is, with all the things that you've done in your career and your life, you're not risk averse by any stretch.
No.
But what are you afraid of, or what scares you?
Oh, what scares me? Man, what scares me is that I will not do exactly what you just said, is that I will not focus enough to get something meaningful done, right? I'm prone to distraction. I love shiny objects, man. Like, somebody comes along with a business idea, I can fall in love with just about any solution. And I love running down rabbit holes and figuring out who needs this solution. But that's my fear, is that I will not have the discipline to step back away from some of those opportunities and focus on the big picture.
Yeah, I don't think we would be good for each other, man, because we're talking each other into everything. Oh, man. Hey, how can I learn more about Elijah May or the Experience Firm or CMO, anything else like that? How can I learn more?
I think I got a link tree up at elijahmay.com. I pride myself in being super Googleable. I'm on LinkedIn more than anything else. LinkedIn.com/in/Elijah May. And I'm on there every single day. I look at every single message I get on LinkedIn, including all of the spam. If I get a message and it's a real person, I'm going to respond 100%.
Wow, let's go. Elijah May. Hey, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Please go like and subscribe on YouTube or Spotify, iTunes, wherever you consume your podcast. And if you'll give me a 5-star review, I'll give you $1 million.
Do it. I'll do it.
Hey, Elijah, thanks so much for joining me, man.
Hey, thank you. Thanks.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.